The first video on action potentials dealt with their formation at the axon hillock and how that works. But the action potential can't just hang around the axon hillock forever. It's got to go further. So how does it get from there to the synapse? That's what you're going to find out now. In order for the information to be stored or processed, the action potentials must be passed on. So here's our neuron. Now we're interested in the part between the axon hillock, here, and the synapse at the end. If you don't know your way around nerve cells yet, just take another look at our video on them. The nerve cell's membrane ensures that the action potential at the axon triggers a kind of chain reaction. The action potential arises at the axon hillock and also causes a change in the potential in its vicinity. This change in potential in turn causes a new change in potential in its vicinity, and so on. And that's how the action potential runs along the axon. But how exactly? If you're looking at axons without myelin sheaths, we can also use the term contiguous conduction. That means that the excitation propagates all the way along the axon, like a fuse cord that is lit by depolarization above the threshold value. But this only for axons without myelinization. Those are the exposed ones without any insulation. One step at a time. Here, an AP arises at the axon hillock, the origin of the axon. An electrical stimulus causes an influx of ions that shifts the membrane potential towards positive. If the threshold value of 40 MV is exceeded, the whole thing kicks off. The fuse cord is lit. Ion channels are also located all along the axon. As you know, these are voltage dependent. So, they open and close depending on the voltage. If the voltage here at the origin changes, it also affects the cells next to it. The voltage change, that is, the action potential, moves along the axon, just like the burning fuse. And that is down to the ion channels opening and closing one after the other. The action potential that arrives at the end looks exactly the same as it did at the beginning. Generally, APs only run in one direction. In other words, they are unidirectional. There is always a refractory period after the first AP before a new one can arise. During this period, that point cannot be depolarized again. It's knocked out, so to speak. Probably because there is a time delay for the sodium channels to react to the action potential. So, they are closed for a short while by small blocking particles and only open again afterwards. The speed at which the excitation is transmitted by contiguous conduction depends on the axon diameter. The fatter, the faster. That's because large diameters result in a greater influx of ions. And this increases the speed. In very tiny nerve tracts, you'll find speeds of a few centimeters per second. We're talking about a speed of 0.5 to 3 meters per second, maybe 30 meters per second at the most. But there are also fat axons, like in the octopus, which fire at 100 meters per second. Those are up to a millimeter thick, by the way. Gross! Unlike with our fuse, no bomb explodes after the transmission along the axon. You'll only reach the synapses, where the action potential is passed on to the neighboring cells. You'll see how this works in our videos about synapses. But that's about it as far as contiguous conduction goes. You probably suspect there's got to be something else. And you're right, there's also another kind of propagation which is not contiguous. It's called saltatory conduction, but we'll talk about that later. As for now, here's your summary. Contiguous conduction takes place in unmyelinated nerve fibers, that is, those without a myelin sheath. Here, the action potential runs smoothly from the axon hillock, along the axon, all the way to the synapse like a fuse cord. This takes place through the voltage-dependent ion channels, which open one after the other. The whole process runs unidirectionally. The potential shift is followed by the refractory period of the corresponding channels. The speed depends on the diameter of the axon and ranges from 0.5 meters per second to a maximum of 30 meters per second. We'll show you a comparison with saltatory conduction of the action potential in the next video. So just click ahead, because your neurons are not all used up just yet. Dive on in and see you soon!